Parents refused to pay for my college, but offered to cover all my sister's expenses. 2 years ago, when I turned 18 and was about to start college, my parents sat me down and said it was time for me to be independent. They insisted I fund my own tuition and learn to manage my life without their financial support, though they promised occasional help if absolutely necessary. This was unexpected because we never had a particularly bad relationship, but I accepted their decision, thinking it would be beneficial to learn how to handle things on my own. I had some savings from part-time jobs, and I decided to work through college to cover my expenses. The past 2 years have been tough. Balancing classes and work has been exhausting, and I live frugally. Occasionally, I ask my parents for money for small expenses, but I try to avoid it, remembering their insistence on independence. Recently, I discovered something that left me questioning their motives. My younger sister, who turned 18 and is about to start college, told me our parents offered to cover all her college expenses. This was confusing because they had claimed they couldn't afford to support both of us, which was why they pushed me to be independent. When I confronted my parents, they initially gave excuses, saying they now realized they could afford it. However, after pressing them, they admitted they thought my sister was a better student and worth the investment more than I was. This was hurtful, especially since I'm not a bad student, just average. Their decision felt like they deemed me unworthy of their support, and they had lied to me about their intentions. My sister, shocked by their actions, considered rejecting their money, but I convinced her to accept it. She deserves the support, and I didn't want her to struggle as I have. However, I decided to cut ties with my parents for a while. I informed them I wouldn't come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, planning to stay with my grandparents instead. This decision led to a big fight between my parents. My father, now realizing the consequences of their actions, blamed my mother for convincing him to withhold support from me. He even threatened to leave her if she didn't fix things. My sister informed me about their arguments, and my mother soon contacted me, urging me to come home, claiming they loved both of us equally. I stood my ground, telling her I wasn't coming home for the holidays and that their actions were hurtful. She accused me of being heartless and unreasonable, saying I wasn't entitled to their money. This angered me because it wasn't about entitlement but fairness and honesty. If they had been honest from the start, I might have respected their decision more. After a few days of not responding to my mother's calls and messages, she showed up at my college. She apologized and admitted their mistake, asking me to come home for the holidays. I told her I would stay with my grandparents but might visit for a few days. She seemed upset but accepted my decision. My sister had been accepted into several great colleges but was reluctant to take my parents' money, feeling guilty. I reassured her that she should accept their support. Meanwhile, my parents decided to go for marriage counseling due to their frequent arguments about the situation. I hadn't spoken to my father since our last confrontation, but after learning from my mother how upset he was, I impulsively decided to call him. He broke down, apologizing for everything. We had a heartfelt conversation, and I told him I needed time to process things but was willing to work on our relationship. We agreed I would stay with them for a week and a half during the holidays to try and mend our relationship. This experience has been challenging, but I'm trying to move forward and find a way to heal our family dynamic. After making the arrangement to spend part of the holidays with my grandparents and the other part with my parents, I felt a bit more settled. I still had a lot of unresolved feelings, but at least now there was a plan. The next couple of weeks passed in a blur as I juggled my remaining classes, packed up my things, and prepared for the upcoming break. When the day came to leave for my grandparents' house, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. My grandparents lived a couple of hours away, and they picked me up early in the morning. The car ride was filled with small talk about school and life, and they were careful not to bring up the situation with my parents too much, for which I was grateful. The time at my grandparents' house was peaceful. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and it was a welcome change from the hectic pace of college life. I spent my days helping my grandmother with holiday baking, decorating the house, and catching up on some much-needed rest. My grandfather took me out for long walks and we talked about everything under the sun. It felt good to be around family who supported me unconditionally. One evening, after we'd finished dinner, my grandfather sat me down in the living room. "Your parents have made mistakes, no doubt about that," he said, his voice steady and kind. "But I want you to know that people can change and relationships can heal, even from something as hurtful as this. Give yourself time, but also give them a chance." I nodded, appreciating his wisdom, even though I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about it yet. I knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but I also didn't want to carry this anger forever. The day I was set to leave for my parents' house, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. My grandmother gave me a long hug at the door, whispering words of encouragement in my ear. My grandfather patted my back, giving me a reassuring smile. "Remember, you're stronger than you think," he said. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than it was. When I arrived, my mother was waiting at the door, her face a mix of relief and nervousness. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt like a child again, seeking comfort in my mother's embrace. Inside, my father was in the living room. He stood up as soon as I entered, looking uncertain and hopeful. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. I nodded and gave him a brief hug. It was awkward, but it was a start. The first few days were tense. My parents were overly cautious around me, trying not to say or do anything that might upset me. It was both comforting and frustrating. I wanted things to be normal, but I knew that it would take time. On Christmas Eve, we decided to have a family dinner. My sister had come home from college, and it was the first time in a while that all four of us were together. The dinner was quiet at first, everyone seemingly lost in their own thoughts. But then my sister started talking about her classes and her plans for the future, and slowly, the conversation began to flow more naturally. After dinner, we sat around the fireplace, reminiscing about old times. My father brought out an old photo album, and we spent hours looking through pictures, laughing and sharing stories. It felt like a small step towards healing. The next day, Christmas, my parents surprised me with a gift. It was a small box, neatly wrapped in colorful paper. Inside was a letter, written by both of them. They apologized once again for their actions and explained how they planned to make things right. They also included a check to cover some of my college expenses for the next semester. I was hesitant at first, but I knew that this was their way of trying to mend things. We spent the rest of the holidays together, and while things weren't perfect, they were better. We talked more openly about our feelings and tried to understand each other's perspectives. My parents started going to therapy, both individually and as a couple, and they invited me to join them for family sessions once I felt ready. When it was time to go back to college, I felt a mix of emotions. There was still a lot to work through, but I felt hopeful. I knew that healing would take time, but I was willing to give it a try. Back at school, I focused on my studies and started looking for a new part-time job that would give me a better work-life balance. My grandparents' offer to help with my expenses gave me some breathing room, and I was determined to make the most of it. My sister and I continued to stay close, supporting each other through the ups and downs. She eventually accepted our parents' help with her college expenses, but we both made it clear that we valued honesty and openness moving forward. Over the next few months, I attended some family therapy sessions with my parents. They were difficult at times, but they also brought us closer together. We learned to communicate better and to understand each other's feelings. Looking back, I realized that the experience, as painful as it was, had taught me a lot about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of family. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was one that ultimately brought us closer together. As I walked across the stage at my college graduation, I saw my parents, grandparents, and sister cheering me on. It wasn't the perfect family picture, but it was my family, and I was proud of how far we had come. The summer after graduation was a time of transition. I decided to stay with my grandparents for a few weeks before moving to a new city where I had landed a job. Those weeks were filled with a mix of relaxation and preparation. My grandparents' home had become a sanctuary for me, a place where I could gather my thoughts and gain strength for the future. During my stay, my grandmother and I continued our tradition of baking together. There was something therapeutic about the process, the measuring, the mixing, the aroma of freshly baked goods filling the house. My grandfather and I kept up our daily walks, and our conversations ranged from light-hearted banter to deep discussions about life and the future. They shared stories of their youth, their struggles and triumphs, which gave me a broader perspective on my own challenges. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, my grandfather handed me a small, worn-out journal. "This was your great-grandmother's," he said. "She wrote about her life, her thoughts, and her dreams. I think you might find some wisdom in her words." I spent hours reading through the journal, finding comfort and inspiration in my great-grandmother's experiences. She had faced her own share of hardships, yet her resilience and optimism shone through every page. Her words became a source of strength for me, reminding me that I came from a long line of strong, resilient women. When the time came to leave for my new job, my grandparents gave me a heartfelt send-off. They assured me that their door was always open, and that they were only a phone call away. Their unwavering support meant the world to me. The move to the new city was both exciting and daunting. I had secured a position at a promising company, and I was eager to start this new chapter of my life. The city was vibrant and full of opportunities, but it also meant starting over in a place where I knew no one. My first day at work was nerve-wracking. The office was bustling with activity, and everyone seemed to know what they were doing. My manager, a kind and approachable woman named Lisa, welcomed me warmly. She introduced me to my team and showed me around the office. Despite my initial nervousness, I quickly found my footing. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and my colleagues were supportive and friendly. As I settled into my new routine, I made an effort to explore the city and meet new people. I joined a few social clubs and attended networking events, gradually building a new circle of friends. I also kept in touch with my family, sharing updates and milestones with them. My parents were especially eager to hear about my new life, and our conversations became more open and honest over time. One weekend, my sister visited me. We spent the days exploring the city, visiting museums, parks, and trying out new restaurants. Our bond had grown stronger over the past year, and we cherished these moments together. She told me about her own plans for the future, and I was proud to see how much she had grown.